All right, hey everybody, Dan Fitzpatrick here, stockmarketmentor.com, and I want to look at a couple things here real quick. First of all, DRAM, which has been a pretty sporty ETF. This is one that has all the all the big dogs in it. Seagate, SanDisk, Micron, and Western Digital, some other stuff as well. So this is a really, really good ETF to be trading if you're in that space and you're kind of having a hard time deciding. What you got to understand though is this is really gappy, like from one day to the next, from the close to the open. This thing went up almost 3.5%. Here on this close, it went down the following day over 5% from top to bottom. So you got to kind of be prepared to ride the lightning. But when you're looking at this on an intraday basis, it actually trades pretty well in the morning and now in the afternoon because of Seagate, which I want to talk to you about in a sec. But so if you're kind of wondering which stock do I trade because they're all a little bit different, then look at the DRAM here because it works. Now, Seagate. Okay, my target was 600. It was $600 here. It was clear over there when I said it in January. So my target was $600. I was joking around today, but I think that this actually works. I had to raise my target. I don't really like to think of myself as an analyst because I'm not, but I'll give my members an edge if I can. And so I do think this runs higher. I think ultimately this sector is going to run out of steam, not in a big way, but it will. It will kind of taper off because there's still a little bit of a let's just say there's a little bit of doubt as far as whether this is demand driven or supply constrained as far as why margins are so big. And then Sam Altman, probably a bigger bullshitter than the guy who runs Meta, is really kind of in a little bit of a pickle because the promises that if you want to call them promises, as far as what they're going to do in terms of revenue this year, as well as like 1 billion active daily users. They came in light. That report got out, and then he and his wonderful CFO immediately denied it. No, everything's fine. And I think like there were a couple folks on the Titanic that were rearranging the deck chairs too. And you remember Kevin Bacon in Animal House up against the wall telling the band all is well. So I don't know what's going to happen with that longer term, but that's just open AI. There's a lot more, obviously, to this than just Chat GPT. So, and the market knows that. I've studied it quite a bit, but look, I'll just be candid. When it comes to actually truly understanding this industry, I'm an imbecile, a self-described imbecile on this stuff. And again, I've studied it. I'm really studying this because I want to know the difference between Western Digital and SanDisk and Seagate and Micron. They're all different. And so I want to know that stuff. But I got to tell you, I could become the smartest person in the world when it gets to this stuff. Don't hold your breath, though. But I could become the smartest person in the world on this stuff, but I'm still not as strong, as smart as the overall market. So we have to pay attention to what the market is telling us as opposed to just what we think. And so the market's telling me, look at the volume here. Market's telling me that this puppy goes upwards. It goes higher. So look, this is the deal. Pretty simple trade today. Just watch how this behaves around the 8-day EMA. As long as it's trading above there, then this uptrend is intact. Look, this thing could gap up to 700 tomorrow. It really could, or not. But once the conference call gets underway and all the notes are out and all the analysts have raised their price target, I just heard on CNBC, some guy also I think he had a I think he had a 700 or a $600 price target, same as me, and he's raising it to 7 or 750. So me, I always want to be the most outlandish guy on the street, so I'm saying 1,000, and that's that. So look, I'm trading live on Thursday and Friday morning. Anybody who has bought a 59-minute trader course, and that includes you, if you decide you're going to buy it right now, is eligible to come to that. And so if you are just buying it now, send Karen an email. That's Karen at stockmarketmentor.com, and tell her that you're interested in joining me on that. And if you have bought it a while ago, you're getting emails on it. I think the second one's going out tonight, and we've got. I don't anticipate having a big bunch of people in there, and that would be fine with me because I do like to answer all the questions. And if you got 40 or 50 people or more in there, that's a lot of questions to be answering in real time. So I think it'll probably be kind of small because we're doing a special offering for Thursday and Friday. So you can kind of do like the double mint twins and double your funds. So anyway, check that out. I will tell you this. People always make money. Always, always make money on these. This is like the real thing, okay? I know how to trade the opening rotation. I've been teaching about it for over a decade. I'd put myself up against anybody as far as trading the opening rotation because I look for select stocks. And if I do not see any, then I go to the gym and do my workout. I don't sit there and try to grind out something that's not grindable. So anyway, check that out, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Okay, have a good evening.